Hi, and welcome to episode 58 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Stephen Hamlin, postdoc at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia.
And today we're joined by Dr. Dan Gillis, who's an assistant professor here at the University of Guelph as well. Dan, you want to say hi and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as Morgan said, my name is Dan Gillis. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Computer Science here at the University of Guelph. My background's actually in statistics, and I do research in spatial temporal modeling, population health risk assessment, ecological risk assessment, and I've got into a few other things, specifically a big project known as Farm to Fork, dealing with food insecurity.
Finally, someone on this show I can relate to. We've gone over this many times, but I'm not the animal person. I'm the theoretical person around here. So I get all kinds of crap because we bring on bug person after bug person.
I know nothing about bugs.
Excellent. We are going to get along fabulously. All right. So so let's start with your scientific work. What are you working on right now?
There are a couple of different projects that I'm involved in. My position, actually, this might give you a bit of background in terms of why I'm doing ecological risk assessment type of stuff. My position is actually sponsored by the Saugeen Ojibway First Nations. So there's two First Nations specifically that make up the Saugeen Ojibway First Nation, and I was working with them while I was doing my postdoc, and they sort of funded the position. So a lot of the work that I do is for them centered around evaluating population health, for lack of a better term, making sure that populations of certain animals are maintained, viable, healthy, robust, that sort of thing. So some of the work that I do is looking at modeling, for example, the population of lake whitefish and Lake Huron to make sure that they're harvested in a sustainable manner so that the population isn't at risk.
I don't want to go all political with this, but has that been impacted negatively by the Canadian government's recent stance on, science?
Fortunately, the work that I'm doing, because it is with the First Nations, it's I haven't felt I haven't actually felt any impact specifically from the government and the silencing of scientists and that sort of thing. But the other nice thing, though, is that we do have other industry that's actually interested in working with us because they want to make sure that they're also not having impact on the environment and such. I mean, it is in their best interest to do that kind of thing.
I'd love to hear more about the work itself, but before we do, I'm kind of curious about how this position arose, because you're probably the first person I've seen who's described their position like this as being sponsored by not only just First Nations, but by a third party in general as an assistant professor. Can you tell us a little more about how that actually works?
Yeah, it was a very weird sort of set of circumstances that led to the position. When I was doing my PhD in statistics, probably about the second year or so that I was involved doing the PhD, I was connected with a faculty member in integrated biology at the University of Guelph named Steve Crawford. And so I started, he recognized the need for statistical work in some of the stuff that he was doing, so he brought me into his group. And essentially what I was offered, he had a postdoc position available. And so he basically split the funding for that position into two sort of half postdocs, if you will. Technically for me it wouldn't have been a real postdoc because I wasn't actually done my PhD, but that's sort of what the funding was intended to be. And so I started working with him, again working with him in the Saugeen Ojibway First Nations. And I was brought in to help them out with evaluating the health of the population of the whitefish in order to set sort of scientifically defensible values for harvest. And based on the work that I've done with them, they liked it and they just wanted to make sure that I was able to continue doing it. So when I finished the PhD in 2010, Shortly thereafter, there was a bit of work to go back and forth with the university to set things up and whatnot, but the position started officially January 1st, 2011.
That's got to be fairly satisfying to be working with a group that actually actively listens to the work that you're doing, as opposed to a lot of academia where we kind of spout it off into the atmosphere and hope that somebody listens in or likes it and then cites it, hopefully. So it must be really nice to have instant feedback and appreciation for that work.
It's fantastic, actually, and I've been in situations when I was consulting in the past, not for the First Nations, but for industry, where I had done some consulting with them. It wasn't environmental or population health level type of stuff. It was very basic statistical consulting, looking at the stuff that they were doing, and identifying for a couple of businesses, hey, if you just do this one thing or this other thing, you'll save a huge amount of money, and then they don't do it. So in this case, it's really, really satisfying to see a group that actually, it's not just they're paying for the work to be done as I guess for optics. They're actually doing something with it. So yeah, it's very satisfying for that point of view.
So I think a lot of people who might be watching this show might not have a great idea of how this sort of modeling works. So can you give a kind of a sketch overview of how you actually go about this and how you translate it into, say a population harvest target?
Yeah. So there are a couple of different models that are standard in this particular type of assessment, but in general what happens is I sit down with the biologists, the people that actually know way more than I do about the environment and about the particular species that we're dealing with, and basically I ask them as many questions as I possibly can to try to figure out what is the most relevant, what is the most important elements or factors related to the actual species that we're dealing with, how the species moves through the lake in terms of its patterns of movement, in terms of when it's moving, its growth patterns, what's known about the mortality estimates, what we know about its predator-prey relationships, all of those types of things. Now, not all of that stuff makes it into the model. I got to figure out how best to put something together to see if I can actually use it, and also to figure out what data are available. Because if we might want to say that yes, we know that this factor over here has an impact, but if we don't have any data on that factor, I got to keep it as realistic as possible. I can simulate it, but when it gets out into the dealing with the real world data, I gotta use what I can use and suggest they possibly start collecting other data for us. So once I sort of have a general picture of what the biology is, then I move from that, developing or extending existing models. There may be simulation studies to figure out whether or not those models actually will estimate the parameters that I'm hoping it will estimate. And then if it does, then we apply them in the real world. The general way that I do it is, given the data that we have and the fact that most of the parameters are there's so little known about a lot of the parameters in general, it typically turns into some sort of Bayesian model with some prior information on some of the parameters, and we just run it until we get some reasonable estimates, and then run it again and run it again and make sure that the estimates seem robust. Once I have something that looks relatively decent, present that and have a conversation about it. Because even if the models say one thing, there's still the conversation with the experts in the field, the biologists in the field, to make sure that whatever the model is saying really makes sense. So without getting into all the technical details of building it, that's pretty much it in a nutshell what happens. But there's a lot of conversation that goes on to make sure that what's being developed and worked on actually is meaningful to the Saugeen Ojibway.
Let's actually switch gears, because I was looking at this initiative that you're involved in, this Farm to Fork.
Yep.
And it looks interesting, but if I'm being totally honest, I'm having a little trouble figuring out exactly what it does. Okay. So can you help me out and tell me a little bit about the initiative and what you're doing with it?
Sure. I'll give you a bit of a background on where it came from, because it's completely different than all the other type of work that I do. It's not statistical in any way, shape, or form. There's no modeling or any of that sort of thing involved in it.
I don't want to hear about it then.
I am a statistician, but I'm in the School of Computer Science, so obviously I'm teaching computer science courses. 2012, I was asked to teach a course known as Systems Analysis and Design and Application. And the idea there is that the students develop a program from scratch, and normally they would develop a game. And I didn't really, I wasn't jazzed about having them build Battleship or something like that. So I worked with a couple of community groups, connected to them through the Institute for Community Engaged Scholarship on campus. And the community groups sort of introduced me to the idea of food insecurity in town. And I was actually quite shocked with some of the information that I found. Guelph is a quite affluent community in the grand scheme of things, but it still suffers a lot from food insecurity. And if we suffer from it, I can't even imagine how bad other cities who aren't as affluent deal with it. So one of the things that struck me is that a lot of the people that go to the food banks and food pantries in town, they often, there are cases where they'll go months without having any sort of fresh fruits or vegetables, no fresh meats, anything like that. So they're getting, when everybody thinks about food banks and food pantries, they think of donating everyone thinks of peanut butter, macaroni, beans and that sort of thing. And so the variety is not there, and so it's not really everyone's contributing because it's the right thing to do, but they're not necessarily realizing that there's this vast nutritional desert that's being created, that these people aren't getting access to healthful foods. So I brought this project to the students, and they went gangbusters over it, which was fantastic. I've never had a group of students attend a class so well. The attendance rate was above 97%, which blew my mind. For computer science, they're night owls for the most part, so you're lucky if you get 50% of the students showing up. Anyway, so what they developed was a website where emergency food providers can essentially create a list of a grocery list, whatever they need, whatever they know that the people who are going to that particular food bank or food pantry requires. And that list is then sent to donors via email the day they go grocery shopping, so that everybody has information about what's needed when they go shopping, and it's an up-to-date list. So donors can then pledge a particular item, and that'll be sort of reduced from the need, so that we can ensure that there's a variety of food getting into the system. And the way the donors connect, they just log into the system, they sign up, they identify when they go grocery shopping, and they basically link to a food pantry or a food bank that's close to them. So the idea is to basically increase the quality and quantity of food being donated to the emergency food system. So that's it in a kind of a large nutshell, but
that's pretty cool. Have you seen a lot of uptake from this?
It has been honestly, it's been overwhelming and crazy and awesome. It was initially intended to be a classroom project. It has taken on a life of its own. It's become a 40-hour-a-week job on top of my professoring job, which is not a bad thing. It's been crazy busy, but it's been awesome. So the community has responded amazingly well to this project. I was actually at a meeting earlier today with some faith-based groups in town who are going to be spreading the word as well to their congregations in the next week or so. But the number of people that are sort of interested in the project has grown, and it keeps growing every day, and it's growing beyond the city. Initially, as I said, it was just a classroom project just for Guelph and Guelph-Wellington, but we've had people from cities across Ontario, across Canada, into the States, Europe, and Australia contact us about when they can have the project. and why can't they have it right now? So it has been overwhelming, but it's been awesome.
So are you planning on opening the project and letting other localities use it?
It was originally, when the students first designed it, we were designing it as an open source project. But what's happened now is because we're trying to expand it, and we've got a bunch of other things that we're working on, we're trying to get to another phase before it becomes more open. There are a few things that we want to do beforehand. The first is we're looking at developing a mobile app so that we can actually harness location-based technologies. The idea there is that the minute you get close to a grocery store or to a food bank or to a market, the phone will alert you basically saying, hey, you're at the market, don't forget to pick up these top 3 things for your particular pantry. Or vice versa, hey, did you know you're near an emergency food provider? You could be providing them this type of thing. So we want to get that developed before we sort of let everything go sort of wild. And we're also looking at working with some of the local grocery chains and national grocery chains to see if we can't get integrated with some of their systems, the point of sale systems, to make it even that much easier for people to donate.
Nice.
I mean, that's really cool and incredibly ambitious as well, especially for an undergrad project. So what's been kind of the response or the impact perhaps from some of the food banks or the users of those food banks to the project? Have you gotten a lot of feedback from them who are seeing perhaps a new influx of fruits and vegetables and these things that are perhaps not as always on the menu?
So far, the feedback from the food banks and the pantries has been really good. There's been a bit of a lag in terms of getting everybody trained and such. The system's not that difficult to use, but the problem for the emergency food providers is finding time. So we've gone through and we released officially in October, and since that time we've been refining a few things again with the emergency food providers to make sure that everything is as easy as possible for them. So we've implemented a couple of new things where they don't have to create a brand new grocery list every week. And some of these things, after we talked about them, like, why didn't we think of that? But these things happen in development. But the emergency food providers have been fantastic in terms of their support. And as of right now, I don't have data to specifically say that there's been an uptick in terms of the food coming in. We're still collecting this kind of stuff, and I just haven't had time to look at what we have to see if there's anything that demonstrates what's happening. I'm looking at, over the summer, starting to collect that data, or not collect it, but analyze that data and see if we can't identify, changes and such. Right now, we're doing a big push to get more and more donors into the system. A lot of people donate, but they, as I said, they think about the standards. So what we're hoping to do is get them into the system to think about other things. But we're also hoping to get out the word to people who wouldn't normally think of donating because they think it's too much of a chore or too difficult, or they don't even know that it's necessary, to get them into the system. So my guess is that once the mobile system is launched, we will see a huge change because it just makes it that much easier for people to, number one, be reminded, but also to donate.
It seems like a natural extension of this sort of idea would be to have a system wherein people could just say order from a mobile app and like click, okay, Safeway, could you donate 3 bags of oranges for me? Instead of having to go buy it, transport it themselves, and that sort of thing.
That's actually phase 4. We finished phase 1. Phase 2 is the mobile app and expansion to different cities. Phase 3 is looking at a logistics sharing program for the emergency food providers. Because right now there's a lot of different emergency food providers. Some have storage space, some have transportation abilities, but in order for them to coordinate, it's a lot of time and effort because it's really at this point still picking up the phone and calling. So we're hoping to develop something to simplify that. So that's phase 3. Phase 4, I have had conversations with a national grocery chain already. The idea is to integrate the system with the point of sale system so that when it pops up on your phone saying, hey, food bank X needs bananas and apples and Kraft dinner. The PLU or the barcodes pop up as well, so that when you go to the point of sale system, you can just have it scanned by the cashier, and that eventually would become just an electronic donation. Because when you think about it, grocery stores are already set up to store this kind of stuff. They do it every day. So why create a brand new, why create a brand new system if the system's already there? So the idea would be that all the food banks or pantries that are in the Farm to Fork system, they get a readout or a printout weekly or monthly saying this is what's been donated, pick it up as you need it. And then there's a fifth phase. Ultimately what we'd really like to do, partly to promote local produce, but also to get the system further into the grocery stores, and also to demarginalize the people that are actually going to food banks and food pantries, is have it set up so that the donations result in almost like a gift certificate or a gift card that families that would normally go to the food banks and food pantries can take to the grocery store, use on local produce, and not feel like they're marginalized, that they have to go over here because they need special stuff. They can go to the grocery store like the rest of us. So yeah, those are all 5 phases. lots of stuff to do, and very ambitious. But a lot of this came from, the students just, saying, "Hey, can't we do this? Why don't we try this?" And the nice thing I think is giving these types of problems to the students is that they have no idea what the institutional baggage is. They don't know about the bureaucracy. They just get ideas and they say, let's go with it. And I'm like, sure, do it. Let's see what happens. And it's been overwhelming. It's been fantastic.
So they don't know what they can't do.
Exactly. It's beautiful.
Awesome.
Are successive classes continuing to work on this?
No. The first class in 2012, there were 6 students from the class of 30 that continued working on it. So some of them worked on it, I guess in theory, in other classes. There's 2 senior undergraduate courses. One's a senior undergraduate project, and another's a senior undergraduate thesis. So there were 6 students that essentially did those for credit, but I've also hired them on as URAs to continue to work on the project over the last year. The last March or April, we had a crowdfunding campaign through Mycorrhiza, raised just over $15,000 to support the project. The Better Planet Project at the University of Guelph has contributed $7,500 this semester to the project. Local businesses and other residents and such continue to donate to the project. So that's been helping us fund. And I'm looking to get a larger grant to sort of, actually evaluate a little bit more rigorously how much, if any, effect it's having. Yeah.
I think it's an awesome project, and I mean, being here at the University of Guelph, I have heard about it from time to time, but having it explained even more is totally fabulous. So, what did the students think? They must have had a much different impression of their course when they come out with a product that is literally changing the community and potentially a broader section of society, rather than, like you say, developing another port of Battleship.
Yeah. Honestly, it was really interesting. At the end of the 2012 winter or fall semester, when they took the course, I went into the class on the very last day, and I had a list of 5 or 6 questions, and I told them, like, I'm not asking for names on who agrees or disagrees. I just want a number count. And I left the classroom, and I had another student come up and basically poll the class. And one of the questions that I asked was whether or not they were proud of what they had done. Because, to be perfectly honest, I was blown away with what they had done. The community members were completely blown away with what they had done. And it was shocking because more than half the class, or close to half the class, said they weren't proud. And when I got back into the class and I looked at this, I was like, what? How are you not proud of this? And the reason that they didn't feel proud is because they were expecting to finish. And I don't think I was very... I didn't communicate effectively enough throughout the semester that this was a project that was bigger than a classroom. ultimately, though, they all recognized what they were doing, and that's sort of, the evidence for that is just the fact that they were coming to class in the numbers that they were coming to class. Of the 30 students, it averaged 29 students above 29 students every class. I think there was maybe 3 classes where a student was missing. In terms of their feedback since the course has ended, the students have commented on, number one, how many people, when they go out and they talk, when they're looking for jobs, how many people have already commented, oh, you're part of that project. Other students have said to me, like, I never knew that we could do this kind of thing with computer science. We thought it was always going to be, working for Google or working for Microsoft or that sort of thing, developing code that does whatever. So they were very excited and very, I think, grateful, and I think they just recognized that it was something different, and that computer science can be used for better things, for social good. So I've got a number of students that want to continue working on the project even past their graduation date in April, and I'm frantically looking for funding to keep them on, because computer scientists right now, they can, when they're done their undergrad degree, they can start getting jobs around here for $60,000 or $70,000 a year. So, having a number of students that want to continue working on the project, knowing full well that they're probably not going to be making $60,000 to $70,000 from a grant that I may or may not have, it's pretty amazing. So yeah, the feedback from the students has been remarkable. I think my favorite moment in the class, there was a point during the middle of the semester or so where I had to go to Kitchener for a meeting for an unrelated project, and I assumed I'd be 5 or 10 minutes late to class, so I warned them, I'm like, I'll be 5 or 10 minutes late to class, just show up, I'll be there. Traffic, of course, that was not the case. For a 80-minute class, I was 50 minutes late.
Ooh.
I was fully expecting to walk into an empty class or just a class of chaos. And I walked in, and there were 4 students at the front of the class leading the discussion on the project. And I sat down. I'm like, I had never been so proud of any of my students in my entire life. I just sat down and sort of was like, all right, I'm just going to let this keep going. And after about 5 or 10 minutes of continued discussion, one of the students asked me if I wanted the classroom back, and I'm like, nope, you guys are good. Just keep doing what you're doing. So, yeah, they really took to it, and I think despite the fact that they were a little disappointed that they weren't able to finish it in one semester, they really did recognize the fact that they were doing something different, which is really cool.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but where can people go to follow along with your scientific research, as well as perhaps follow along with Farm to Fork, and hopefully keep an eye on when they can join, even if they're not from Guelph?
Sure. So Farm to Fork, the best thing to do is just go to the website. It's farm-to-fork.ca, and 2 being T-O, not the number 2. And in terms of my research and such, danielgillis.wordpress.com, that's correct. Or you can follow me on Twitter, Dr. Daniel Gillis. What else? Or just go to the School of Computer Science at the University of Guelph, and there'll be a link somewhere in there that'll connect you to my stuff.
Awesome. And for everybody listening at home, we'll be sure to put those links and connections up on our blog, which is you can find at breakingbio.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at breakingbio, and find us on Facebook as well by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. I'd like to say thanks to Dan for joining us this week, and for everybody at home, I hope you'll join us next week for another new guest.